We are recording, so whenever you're ready, take it away, Ed.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. We are so happy that you're here with us. We're here to talk about making every course experiential, strategies for curricular integration. My name is Ed Beck. I was co-chair of the FACT2's Council's task group on experiential learning this year. And the FACT2 group is a group called the Faculty Advisory Council on Teaching and Technology. It's a cross SUNY group that focuses on important areas and innovative ways of teaching and learning and how we integrate technology into that. Every year we focus on a couple different things. We normally have task groups. The two main task groups this year from FACT2 have been a task group on AI and then also this task group on experiential learning. So we're really happy to have you here with us. And one of the things that I want to get us started on as we, consider experiential learning is just thinking about what that means in SUNY. Um, in SUNY, when we talk about experiential learning, what we're talking about is the direct experience, integrated into courses, credit-bearing experiences that have some kind of, structured, intentional focus on putting students in real-world experiences. And for SUNY, that can mean a whole lot of things. SUNY kind of broke it up into three big buckets. They have the SUNY Works bucket, which is our like co-ops, our internships, our work studies, clinical placements, practicums. Then we have the SUNY Serves kind of bucket that they've identified, things like service learning, things like community service, things like civic engagement and volunteerism. And then we have the SUNY Discovers big bucket, and that's things like our research, our entrepreneurship, our field studies, our experiences abroad, and our creative works. And SUNY defines all of these as being curricular, right? Because when we have an internship, it is supervised by faculty members. It is for credit. And so what we are talking about today is really that course-based internship where we have an existing course and we've decided, let's add a project into it. Let's add a component into it. Let's make this course that already exists. Let's see how experiential learning can serve the existing outcomes of this course and what that looks like. And I got to tell you, from my standpoint, it's one of the things that's exciting for me. Um, I'm going to invite our panelists up to introduce themselves and to also speak about how they got into this broad bucket of experiential learning. And we'll start with Chilton Reynolds.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you. It's a pleasure to be here today and have this discussion. So thank you, Ed, for the invitation. My name is Chilton Reynolds. I'm the director of the Faculty Center for Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship at SUNY Oneonta. And our mission of our center is to be able to support faculty in the work they are doing. About 3 to 4 years ago, we started to do a rethink of the priorities of our center, and we're basing those a lot around the AAC&U high impact practices. We started to think about which of those we can really make an impact in. And we're thinking about things like project-based learning and how we can support those. And we're thinking about ways that we out of the center can make a meaningful impact on our campus. And so have really been trying to think about ways we can support faculty in doing that. And so really appreciate where Ed started with this of that definition of experiential learning very broadly to be able to say, what are those things that are happening in the classroom that are often project-based that are meaningful for the students as an experiential learning experience. And so have been thinking a lot about that over the past couple of years and had a chance to write a grant proposal internal for our campus to be able to do some work around supporting initiatives on campus. And this is one that happened as a part of a conversation we were having with some other departments on campus. And so went to our academic affairs office and said, we were thinking about this, how can we be supportive of this? And got feedback that connecting what students are doing with life after college would be a good place where we could help And so it was a space where we were interested in and excited in, but also felt like it was outside of our wheelhouse a little bit. So it wasn't something where we could just say, we can do this on our own. We got this. And so it was a really nice opportunity to say, who do we need to collaborate with on our campus to be able to do that? And so started to build together a group that wasn't just our faculty center, but included our career development center, which we call our career planning and networking center on our campus. Some different faculty that were doing some of this work already in some of their courses, and across their schools. And then some co-curricular spaces, which we can talk about a little bit later. And that was an exciting space to be in, to be able to say, no, this isn't something we own, but it's something we can help and enhance. And so have really it had a good had a good space to start in from that, to be able to say, here's how we can fit into this, here's how we can be a part of this. So we've had something that we've been running for the last 3 years called Future Ready Fellows, where it's a way for faculty to help students be able to really express what they're doing in the classroom in a way that's meaningful for students, connecting that into some frameworks that will be useful for students after college, including the NACE career readiness competencies, and are really excited about where that's taking us as a campus and as a center, in the ways we can both work inside of our own campus as well as collaborating across campus. And I'll pause there for right now so we can have more conversation.
Thanks, Chilton. Jessie, can I invite you to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today, Ed. Happy to be here. I'm the Executive Director of the Career Design Center at SUNY Geneseo. I've been working in career services within SUNY for quite a while now. Prior to being at Geneseo, I was at Buffalo State University for about 17 years in their career center, and now have been at Geneseo for a little over 6 years now. So I've been working in this space in multiple different roles, but kind of my roots are as a career coach or a career counselor. And so, really having had the opportunity to sort of do the work, boots on the ground, and then kind of move up into a leadership role in my current institution. One of the interesting things about Geneseo that I'll talk a little bit about as well is one of our general education requirements is actually an integrative and applied learning requirement. So our institution as a whole has had to think about all the various touch points from academic affairs throughout the institution to help students achieve this general education requirement, whether that's in the classroom or a student-initiated experience. But how I became really connected with Chilton and Ed is that I have the last few years joined them, helping them to do some training in their faculty program that Chilton just spoke about. So it's been really a pleasure to learn and be part of their institution. And I originally got connected with them because I also teach course 3 in the SUNY CPD Career Readiness Certificate. So that course specifically is focused on integrating career readiness into your role and into your campus culture. And I am really passionate about thinking about all of the different touch points across an institution around where career intersects. And I really love the shift from the, career being a place and destination on campus to really thinking about it from a cross-campus perspective. I like the challenge of that. I think, having been in this field for quite some time, I've really enjoyed watching that shift happen in the importance of career and really the conversation around ROI and higher education and what that means in regards to career readiness and career outcomes, and also career mobility long term as we think about the success of our students. And I'll talk more about this in a minute, but for us, at least at Geneseo, one of the things to talk about academic integration, when I first started on the campus, we were in student and campus life. So we were very traditionally located, and like the end of 2021, I really pushed hard for that shift to occur, for us to move to academic affairs. And I can't stress enough that where that is located is really unique to your institution. There's no right or wrong place, but for Geneseo, it made a lot of sense for us to be in academic affairs. And we also shifted the perspective of from the Department of Career Development to the Career Design Center to really empower students to think about they're in control of what this looks like in the future, and also give the campus a sense of conceptually, how they play a role in helping students design what this looks like. So that's just a little bit about my background and how I ended up here. But it's great to be here.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to highlight something that got popped into the chat, and it was from my co-chair on this experiential learning journey, Mara Huber. She says, I love the shift from this is something we can own, that this is something that we can enhance. And that was really important to us. And I'm gonna just share a little story. How did we get into experiential learning as a faculty center? Like, why did we think that this was the right place for us to be? And it started from an e-portfolio project that I was working on with a single faculty member, just instructional designer and faculty member. We were working one-on-one with this class on e-portfolios. And we started to do a little scholarship of teaching and learning project on this e-portfolio initiative that we were doing. And as we were doing the lit review and getting things together, I didn't have a deep background on the NACE competencies and what that meant, but I was looking for frameworks that were in the literature that I could kind of benchmark to as we built our questions. I stumbled across the NACE competencies, and we ended up creating a series of questions to ask her students in an interview format after the course was done. And actually, it took a little while for us to get IRB approval. So we actually ended up interviewing the students 6 months after their course had finished, which at the time seemed like terrible. But then it was like awesome that we were reconnecting with these students a little while after their educational experience, right? So they made these portfolios in the course, and we were asking them questions like, hey, have you put anything else in your portfolio lately? Like, how are you showcasing your skills? And each question was kind of aligned to a NACE competency. And I'll always remember we had this one student that was like, I actually used my portfolio and used it in a job interview and got hired for a job for an internship or a job in my field. I forget whether it was an internship or a job. But I didn't really think about putting anything from that internship back into the portfolio because I didn't really have anything that was like mine at the internship. All I did was work in a team-based environment where I did fact-checking for articles for fashion journalism. So like the article wasn't mine that I could put in the portfolio because all I was doing was the fact-checking on there. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, we have to stop this interview right here. All you did was work in a collaborative team-based environment. You had a specific area that you were adding value to this overall project, and then you were working on things that actually got published in a publication in your field. And what you said is all I did. And I remember I went from that interview and I knocked on Chilton's door and I was like, we need to be doing more of this work. We need to be doing more of this work and encouraging the reflection and encouraging the thought process when we put our students in these great situations. We have to help them make those connections, and we have to be doing it at a course level. And so let's build a fellowship program of faculty where we do this together. And it was an uncomfortable thing because we're like, well, can we do that as a faculty center? Are we allowed to do that? Like, would we be stepping on our career center's toes to do that? And so it was important to go to them and get them as partners in this endeavor and say, like, is this something you'd be willing to do with us? And go with us. And that has been such a wonderful and rich partnership that I'm really proud of, and it is a lot of fun and gets me excited to go into work in the morning. So we've been thinking about these course-based experiences, and Jessie, this question's going to be for you. Can you help give me your pitch? What are some of the advantages here of doing this course-based experiential learning? Why is it important that we do this type of work?
I love this question, and this is probably, to me, one of the most the things that makes me really passionate about the work that I do. If you look statistically speaking, depending on which report you read, the stats for the numbers of students who engage with their career center on campus, if you even have a career center on your campus, because quite frankly, some, especially two-year schools, they've been eliminated and absorbed. If you were to see how many students actually engage with their career center for a variety of things, it will range anywhere between like 25 to 60% of students. Of those students, the students who do come into us usually have come from a background, typically, where they have a sense of privilege, perhaps, where they have parents who've gone to college or people in their life, mentors who say, you know, there's this place that exists on your campus. It's called the Career Center or whatever it's called on your campus. You really should go get your resume looked at, do some career exploration, take a career assessment, whatever that guidance is. So the students who actually physically get into our office in some way, shape, or form, you know, it's upwards, it's not even more than half, just barely half. So now that we've had a significant shift in demographics and we have more first gen students coming to campus, a large shift in underrepresented students coming to campus, that percentage, I would say, of those students is significantly lower. So my take on all of this, and actually how I gained traction on my campus to make the shift to academic affairs for us, was through a lens of DEI. All students should be aware of and have knowledge of the importance of understanding the skills that they're gaining. What you were just talking about, Ed, and what a number of people have said in the chat, helping them unpack those skills. Most students won't do that intuitively. So I think personally that this should not be an opt-in experience. This should be essential to the core of the student experience, and that shouldn't be dependent on what major the student's in, because we all know the School of Business, for example, does a great job at this. It's really embedded into the curriculum. You know, education, it's built into those clinical placements and student teaching. Healthcare, you know, as some examples. But then when you look more at the arts and sciences and the humanities, that's not always built in. So it shouldn't be a conditional based on major. It should not be conditional based on the advisor you have. It should not be conditional based on the background or the social capital that you have. So for me, why this work is so incredibly important is that so every single student has the opportunity to look forward to that future and think about career outcomes and career mobility in a holistic way. And it should be at the core of the experience, and we shouldn't be leaving it up to chance that the person comes across of the right person in the right place at the right time. There's too many things that could happen that could prohibit a student from making those connections. So if it's embedded into your coursework strategically, you know this is happening. You know every student has that same opportunity, at least in that, and that to me is equity at its core. So that's, you know, I think really big picture, the foundation for me, why this academic integration is really the key essential ingredient to equity and career outcomes at all of our institutions.
Thank you, Jessie. I think that's such a strong statement to say doing this work, doing experiential learning, integrating it into the curriculum is equity work. And that's something that I've tried to integrate into my own pitch as I talk about experiential learning on my own campus. And I've learned that from you. And so I just want to just say like thank you, because I think it is so important that we frame this from a lens of equity, and we talk about that in that way. What we have control of is our curriculum. That's what we can ensure that the students have as part of their experience. And if we do that, then that is an essential part of what it means to be a student at SUNY. Chilton, I want to ask you the same question. What are the advantages of course-based experiential learning? Why is it important for us as a faculty center to be engaged in this type of work? Faculty centers have a lot on their plate. Why experiential learning as one of our focuses?
Yeah, and before I start, I'll echo, if I've appreciated, Jessie, your view on that equity part of this as a way to be able to say the language around how to say this is something that's important for all of our students to be a part of. And I'll jump back to where we started in this was from the space of let's look at high impact practices. We have been doing work on project-based learning, global connectedness, e-portfolios, as Ed mentioned earlier. And what I've really appreciated about the SUNY definition of experiential learning is it allows there to be a broad space. Sometimes people hear experiential learning and they think, oh, it's got to be an internship or it's got to be X. And we can say, no, if it has these components, then that counts in the broad umbrella of experiential learning. And so my experience has come out of, on our campus have been doing COIL, which is Collaborative Online International Learning, connecting students on our campus with students on another campus internationally and doing project-based collaborations. When we look at those structures of experiential learning, we can say that fits inside of that if we make sure that those structures are in place for there. And there's many places across campus where we can say, this doesn't have to be an internship or this. We can say, if you are doing things that are meaningful for students, where they can see it's not just about the learning, but how it is applied in good, productive ways for not just themselves, but maybe a larger audience, that is important for the students to be able to connect. And I'm with Jessie, and as we think about all the students that might not think about themselves going to a career development center, that are doing things in the classroom, we're like, yes, what you are doing is important beyond this classroom. Think about the example of student that Ed talked about who's doing this great work of team building, where they are doing teamwork, they are doing this in a critical and thoughtful way. Those are skills that they should be thinking about. So we were already doing work around supporting faculty and implementing some of those, but as we've said already in some of this, the piece that's often missing is helping the students make that connection between this thing that I'm doing and how I can talk about it after I leave. And I think Ed put this in the chat earlier, but when we first started doing this initiative that we mentioned earlier, we called it a career readiness thing. And we realized it's bigger than career readiness. It's really helping students prepare for whatever they are doing next. And so reframed it to this idea of helping you think about your future and what you're doing now in relationship to what you want to do next. Whether that's grad school, whether it's civic engagement, whether it's a job, career readiness, but these skills are important. And so taking the time to help them think in multiple spaces across campus, curricular and co-curricular, about what the skills they are doing, helping them reflect on it in a meaningful way where they can express what they are doing, becomes what is really important inside of this. And so we feel like out of the Faculty Center, we can help our faculty do the work of creating space regularly for our students to reflect on the work that they are doing and how that can fit into a broader scale for them. And so that's where I enjoy this idea of equity, as Jessie was talking about earlier, saying we are doing this. Sometimes we've been thinking about it on smaller scales, and we need to say, okay, if you really want to think about this as experiential learning, then we need to make sure it has structured space inside of it that is reflected on regularly, or you're getting feedback on where it's applied beyond the classroom. And so there are some ways where we can work with faculty to reframe what they're doing into maybe a little bit broader scope, but also make it that much more meaningful for the students. And then in the process, hopefully help them also connect and say, okay, now you've done this, go talk to our Career Development Center. These are places where now you can take this work that we've done here, and that's going to help you when you go there and hopefully help you be more successful.
Yeah, I want to highlight a question that came through in the chat, and it came from Carla Deltrust Jutt. They asked, how would you ensure that students in a liberal arts, specifically a humanities program, would get in terms of career and experiential learning? And Carla, I'm going to start this off with saying that my bachelor's degree and first master's degree was in history. And I'll just spill the beans on Chilton, who was a music educator. All right. So we do not mean, when we talk about career readiness, when we talk about NACE competencies, when we talk about career competencies, we do not mean typing. I'm trying to think of something derogatory I could say. When we refer back to the NACE competencies, right? The NACE competencies are things like career development, communication, critical thinking, leadership, professionalism, equity and inclusion, teamwork, technology. I think I got all 8. Okay? Those are the NACE competencies. You do not need to look far to find those embedded deeply in a humanities program. And so to say like, in my history degree, I had to really think hard about how I was going to be able to gather historical evidence and synthesize from a variety of places and communicate that effectively out to who I was. And these are things that my training as a historian taught me that I integrate into my career every single day. Helping the students make those connections and make those dots, I do not see these things as an opposition, right? And in fact, when we started the Future Ready Fellows at SUNY Oneonta, one of the people that we brought on board was someone who was kind of tasked to do this from our College of Liberal Arts, and became a great partner in what we were doing, this faculty member. And so, when we often find is the skills are already there in the course. The authentic experiences are already ready to be integrated into the course, and we don't have to make it a versus or a this or that. And I think that we need to speak that broadly to our humanities faculty as well, to make sure that they don't feel like the initiatives that we're doing and the things that we're trying to do is not against their traditional discipline, because there's a big fear in the humanities that things like the Future Ready Fellows are against their traditional discipline.
And I'll chime in there I had not heard of the NACE competencies before we started this project that I've been talking mostly about today. It came from conversations across campus when we said, what are the core or common language that's being used across campus? Are there frameworks that are being used? And we actually found out that we have a leadership program called LEAD on our campus that uses the NACE competencies. We found out that our Career Development Center was using the NACE competencies. And we were like, oh, great, there are frameworks that are being used on our campus. There is a common vocabulary that can be established. And so when we started to look at these, that's when we started to say, as Ed was saying, oh, these are things that are happening right now. My background's in music, as Ed said, and I think back to how I got to where I am in a faculty center from that, and I look at the skills that are here inside of NACE, thinking about leadership, thinking about teamwork, thinking about critical thinking and communication. Those are things I got out of my music background that became really useful for me. And so I appreciate and am now able to better articulate how those experiences have been meaningful for me. I was doing those before NACE without really realizing some of those, but being able to have that framework that was common across our campus is really powerful, because then what we wanted was faculty could say, here's the NACE competency on critical thinking, be thinking about that. And then when they go to our Career Development Center and the Career Development Center says, have you done anything around critical thinking? They can say, oh yes, I've already had those conversations in some of my other classes previously. So having that common vocabulary became such a powerful and exciting thing for helping us move forward with this project.
And yeah, Jesse, I want to invite you into this conversation, because I know you've done a lot of work trying to build that cross-campus collaboration in support of experiential learning. And I just what we stumbled into it like idiots. But what advice do you have for the people that we are on this webinar and say, okay, you've convinced me. How do I get started?
So that's a really great question. I think it really, for me, came from, as a career center, for so many years saying, trying to get more of a center stage at an institution, not so much these days because it is part of a national conversation, but going back years ago, we would fight for, and I don't know if anyone on here is on this is in career services or has worked in the past in career services, but you had to fight to get a space of importance historically at your institution, at many institutions, in particular with the liberal arts institutions. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because as much as we want every student to interact with us, at the end of the day, we don't have enough staff to truly serve every single student. Even at Geneseo, a smaller institution, if every student walked through our door, we would not be able to reasonably scale that one-on-one approach. So, you know, I think for me, thinking about creative approaches to that shared vision. And so, you know, I think a big part of this is that top-down vision of what does this look like at your institution? And I would say probably one of the most important things is to get buy-in from your leadership. And even more than that, I push to really have it be part of our strategic plan, so that every single touch point across the institution, there is nobody building in extra, you know, an extra add-on. That is part of what, as an institution, you're committing to. And then very specifically, this is how it will be done. So for example, you know, at my institution, one of the things that ended up being part of the strategic plan is that we really talked a lot about first-year seminars. So if we could build in that foundational experience across the board, the idea was that every student would be aware of different opportunities and like, what is experiential learning and why is that important? And thinking about that as a first-year student versus what you might traditionally see experiential learning be part of, which is like capstone courses. Well, if you're just learning about it as a senior, it's not that there's no hope. It's just that it would be a lot easier if you learned about it as a first-year student, so that you could be more intentional in sort of connecting the dots in that career exploration piece, to be a solid foundation to build upon. So I think, you know, from an institutional perspective, I think those cross-campus relationships are critical, because, you know, as much as we talk about academic integration, I also think that there's so many interesting spaces across the campus where this can be done and you can think creatively about it. And I think that really, you have to have strong partnership with your leadership, and you have to have a voice, a person at the table who can be in these meetings where these conversations are being had and advocate for this work. It took me a while to get to that place. I'll be honest with you. It took me, I really had to knock down some doors, and I really had to push my way into conversations. And I just kept going for it. And I realized that the language I was speaking originally wasn't resonating. And I'll go back to the DEI work for a second, but it wasn't until I reframed that lens for me that the door started to open to have parts of these conversations. So I think you have to understand what's important to your institution and how do you speak that language in a way that they're going to hear it, it's going to resonate. And that's how you end up getting it to into the strategic plan in a way that works for your institution. And what works for Geneseo obviously is not going to work for every institution, but, you know, where does it fit for you and how does that manifest itself? And I think that's where the creativity comes in. And you have to build allies, because it can't just be one person saying it, like your director of your career center, for example. It has to be multiple people. I mean, dean relationships, super important, chair relationships. I mean, I would literally go and offer to buy lunch, buy coffee. I'd love to get to know you. Let's talk. This wasn't me just knocking on a door saying, oh, this is important, and all of a sudden it was in the strategic plan. This took years of relationship cultivation, having in understanding the needs of other places across campus and other academic departments across campus, because what I thought worked really wasn't necessarily the agenda on other people's plates. So like, what are the barriers? I think you have to come at it from understanding, like, what are the barriers, what's holding people back, and a whole other talking point about this is this can't just be an add-on. You have to think about, how does this play into, for example, for the faculty on here, you know, how does this play into promotion, tenure, and evaluation? It has to be part of that. Like, you can't just ask people to do more. The institution has to actually rethink what counts as, you know, this should be impactful, important. So if you have faculty that are overseeing internships or teaching experiential learning as part of their course, you know, how does that weigh into that evaluation piece? And it should count for something. If you're not getting extra service or other ways to be compensated, because people aren't just going to do it for the goodness of what I call the passion tax. Otherwise what happens is you have the same people across the institution who show up consistently, and those are the people that are going to continue to do the work because they love it and are passionate about it. And that's, that cycle will persist. I could go on, but I'll stop there.
I mean, I'm not going to complain. So I'll invite Chilton back into this conversation and thinking about um, experiential learning. We start with that big, broad definition of experiential learning. And that broad definition is nice in that we can really see how a lot of things fit into there. But then broad definition can also be tough because it's kind of like, where do I start then? If experiential learning could be so many different things, like what is the concrete advice that I can have? And so just like I asked Jessie from an institutional level, like, what's your advice? What do you do? What's your advice to an individual faculty member? What do you do if you're just starting with this type of thing? Like, what do you tell people who are in your cohort that have said, yes, I want to be part of your future ready fellows?
Yeah. And I'm going to take a step back for just a second, because there's some stuff in the chat that I think goes right into this conversation, what we're saying of one of the reasons I like this is because there has been this push in an external narrative around needing to be career ready. What is the career I'm going to have when I come out of college? And I've always bristled at that, coming from a music background, of saying I got so many skills from my music background, a humanities background, that were the skills that I need to have now. And I think there was the term of soft skills, hard skills, that was in the chat for just a little bit, and really saying those are the important skills. And so I appreciate that conversation of saying this gives us language, NACE competencies give us language to say these important skills that employers are asking for are the skills that are often brought out in a lot of humanities classes and a lot of classes across campus. And so in the work that we do, that's kind of the first thing is we say, what is the work that you are doing that is meaningful, that you think would be good for your students? And we actually start with the NACE competencies, and we say, these are skills that you are probably already doing in the classroom. What are you doing around critical thinking? What are you doing around teamwork? Have that conversation with them. Jessie had said earlier, she's been part of those initial conversations on our campus, and it's been great to have her come in as a kind of an outside lens to say, think about these things in relation to your class. If we want to make them a true experiential learning, then we can look at that framework of, okay, are you doing scaffolded learning inside of this? Is this an applied project? Are you doing reflections with your students and build that out? But then the last step that we have been trying to focus on with our faculty is, we want you to make sure there are times for your students to practice expressing that in some way. It isn't enough to say, yes, I do critical thinking, check, we're done. No, if your students can't leave the class and say, I did this and this demonstrates critical thinking, and this is how it could be useful for me after this class, that's not enough. And so we want to push towards, how do we help faculty provide space for students to practice making the connections on their own between, right now we've been using the NACE competencies. We've been very open about that. The NACE competencies are good, so choose at least one of them. Make sure that there is a space in the class for students to write it out, talk it out, do a fake interview, a mock interview, and get some feedback. Have them actually practice that in some way, and make sure they're getting feedback on that. And it doesn't have to be really strong feedback of, I'm grading you an A to an E on this. It could be hey, here's some ways you could strengthen that. But make sure they are getting feedback on that, so that it isn't just yeah, I do professionalism, great, or I do critical thinking, or I do communication in the classroom. No, we want the students to really make that connection as well. And so that's where we've made the shift, is let's not say, go to the professor and say, do you do critical thinking? But how do your students express they know they did critical thinking when they leave this class?
Yeah, I mean, we start right from, how do you talk about it on syllabus day? What does it say in your syllabus about the kind of, because it makes a difference, right? Lots of classes have group work in them. But just because a class has group work doesn't mean that it, fills, the definition of experiential learning. You have to be explicit about it. Saying to your students, wait a minute, everybody, just stop. I want to tell you one of the reasons why I have group work in this class. You cannot believe the number of meetings that I go to as a professional. And when I go to these meetings and we talk for an hour and nothing has changed from the meeting and no one has done a takeaway and no one has made a goal. So when I make you write SMART goals from your group meetings and you have a specific and deliverable goal that you will deliver on, that is so that someday when you sit in an interview and they say, how do you work in group-based environments? You can say, I'll always reflect back on that professor that really just always was just hammering away at SMART goals and making sure that at the end of a group discussion, we knew where we were headed, that it was specific, it was deliverable, that we could do that. So that you have a story to do in that question. And you know what? I'm going to make you tell that story. I'm going to make you practice like I asked you the interview question and talk about how your communication and how your group work skills are because it's that important. So it's planned, it's specific. We've talked about how we're going to do it and we've made those students practice because practice really does make perfect of making those connections. I told you why we're doing it. Now you integrate it into your own experience and you do that reflection because it really does help them. Getting off track. I'm gonna pick on myself. I wrote the title of this webinar. I wrote the title, Make Every Course Experiential. I'm not sure if that's possible to make every course experiential. So I'll ask you, is it possible to make every course experiential? Why or why not?
You want to go first, Jesse, or me too? Sorry, I was typing fast in the chat earlier and I said construction instead of constructive feedback. And so I'm fixing that. It's not construction feedback that makes perfect. It's constructive feedback that makes perfect. So sorry, I apologize. I was trying to do two things at once. I would push back as well and say, I don't think it's appropriate in experiential learning as the definition is appropriate in every single class. Jess, I think you mentioned this earlier of we should be from first year building in some of the skills and introducing skills that help us get there. I think of scaffolding all the time. Freshman year, first year, you should be thinking about, we should be introducing these competencies and having students think about that framework, whether it's part of experiential learning or not. We should be having reflections from the very beginning that say this. If we have those as building blocks to start off with, a good foundation, then when we get into classes that are appropriate for experiential learning or co-curricular experiential learning, that gives them the vocabulary and the practice and the tools to be able to make that even more useful. So I would argue we don't need to have experiential learning in every single classroom, but we should start to have the building blocks to help students think about that right from the very beginning. And I'll stop there for a second. Jessie, throw in anything you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think idealistically, absolutely, it's reasonable to think that somewhere, and I agree with what Chilton just said, experiential learning might not be appropriate in every single course, but definitely there's an inkling of career readiness, career educations, even if it's a reflective element on, what did we just learn? However, I will say that theoretically it's possible. I think at many institutions it is not feasible because the support and structure is not in place to do this and to do this well. And one of the comments in the chat, I forgot who put it in there, it was a little bit back a bit, but I think it's really important, was that more professional development and more training needs to exist for people across campus, not just faculty, but staff as well, about how their area or their coursework or their department, like how can they think innovatively about the work that they're doing? What do they have the capacity to do right now? I mean, I think a lot of us are feeling right now in higher education, it's a really challenging time. There's a lot of work to be done. Our resources are very scarce. Adding one more thing to people's plate is the quickest way to get people to not be so excited about it. And so I don't think the way is to, as an institution, say this is just going to be done. I think you have to build in the support and infrastructure to support the people that are doing this work. And I will also say, one of the things that, I've had conversations around with SUNY about is, someone also said, this is the support there for this. I think one of the chancellor's big initiatives is for every single student, SUNY student, before they graduate, is to have an applied learning or experiential learning experience. And I think that is a wonderful goal. But we also have to think about, do we have the infrastructure in place to support this? Because there needs to be people who know how to do this and to do it well, so that that experience is in fact a high impact experience. I think, probably everybody maybe could relate a little bit to this, where maybe you said yes to take something on, and then you're thinking, I don't have the bandwidth, and I wish I was doing a better job at this. We want to do it, and we want to do it well. So whether that's integrating it into a course or other roles within your institution, I just think that because I teach the career readiness course 3 for SUNY CPD, I one of the biggest learning I've had is I've worked with many people across all the campuses across SUNY, and I have heard their reflections on their struggles and barriers. And I will say that the majority of our institutions across SUNY do not have the bandwidth and support to do this work and to do it well. And so while I'm personally the biggest cheerleader for it, I just don't think a lot of our campuses are in a place where this would be successful if all of a sudden it became we're going to do this. I really think that campuses have to look internally and say, like, what are we going to do differently, or what perhaps are we not going to do to allow people to do this well?
Yeah, you can't just keep adding +1, +1, +1 on the faculty. So I want to keep going on this thread for a second. Chilton, this question is going to be for you. You've been running a Future Ready Fellows. Now we're in year 3 of doing that. What does that support look like? Can you give us kind of like a broad overview of that program to give an idea of the scope and the support that those faculty members are getting who are integrating those types of activities into their class? Because I think, it's very, we can get hyped up and say, you know what, this is why we got into education. This is what we believe in. And I agree with that, right? I really agree with that. Like, this is what I want courses to be like. But I also want to recognize the amount of work that this is and the amount of support that faculty need. And I think that the Future Ready Fellows kind of can show a little bit about what some of that support can look like.
And real quick, I just wanted we've been saying experiential learning and applied learning. And I just want to make that comment of applied learning was kind of the word that was the buzz about 6-7 years ago, and there was a shift to experiential learning, but that we use those interchangeably. And so, like, I posted the definition of applied learning, but those are the same things that we're using for experiential learning, is that broad umbrella. So I just wanted to make that point, because I realized we've been saying both those terms a lot throughout this, and I at least, I use those interchangeably at this point. So I just wanted to kind of say that. The other thing I wanted to say is that we have on our campus, we have a mechanism for applying for funds that are aligned with our strategic goals. This goes back to what Jessie was talking about earlier. And so it's Forward Momentum is the name of our that initiative that's done by our president. So we were able to actually get some stipends for faculty to be able to do the work that we're doing right now. So I just want to say that out loud as we get started with this part of this conversation. With that, what we do is we have time for the faculty to come together and talk about, first, what are the NACE competencies and what is the work that you're already doing in your classroom. And we've been very focused on, we don't want this to be big changes. We're trying to be aware of this conversation we're having. We want to recognize the work that's already being done in the course as much as possible. And so in that case, it's not a go back and redesign your course. It is a identify what you're already doing in your course and how can we help students make better connections to those. So it is about saying, okay, I do this teamwork activity in my classroom. Great. What are 1 or 2 more questions you can ask to get students really reflecting on those skills that they did as a part of that? So it's in that case, here's 2 questions that you're adding in. There's some reflection and some feedback that you're getting. So we really want it to be identify what you're doing, help students identify what they're doing, have them practice doing it, and then getting feedback. And so we've really focused on what are the little changes that can be done, small changes that can be done to tweak it in a way where it becomes more meaningful for students, not in a way that's redesigning the course. So we have a session where where we look at what are you already doing in the classroom? What are you doing on how do you address this in your syllabus? And we now collect enough examples we can share out. Here's how other people address the NACE competencies in their syllabus. Then we look at what are activities you're already doing and how can you frame those in a way that would be useful for students. And we're in our 3rd year of this. We've collected enough examples that we can share out previous ones. And we've been very purposeful in trying to have people be a part of this from every single school on our campus and multiple departments. So we can see this at from different lenses, from different disciplines. And so you can say, oh, this is more of an applied class. This is more of a written class. This is more of whatever. We're hoping to have examples on all of that. And then finally, what type of feedback are the students getting? And we purposely phrased it that way to be able to say, it might be feedback that they're getting from a peer. Maybe they're doing mock interviews with one other person. They're getting feedback from that person on whether that was clarity. Maybe it's feedback from you as the professor. Maybe it's feedback from a visiting instructor who's coming in to talk with the class for just a little bit. So we purposely allowed feedback to be in multiple ways. But those are the big things of what are they doing? How can students have space to reflect on that? And then what type of feedback are they getting? And we're really trying to make it be small changes that are a part of that. A recognition. We're not trying to say add a bunch of new stuff in. Let's recognize the stuff we're already doing and empower students to talk about that more usefully for them after they leave the class.
So the question was, what is the support they're getting, or what does the program look like? It happens over the course of a semester. We typically have a kickoff day where we spend an entire day together for a workshop, and then we have monthly meetings after that throughout the whole semester. So we're really talking about a structured program that isn't like a one-off workshop. It is a continual involvement with these faculty throughout the semester. And in each of those meetings, we have representatives from the faculty center and from our career and networking center, because one of the big takeaways that the faculty always tell us about, that was always like they always tell us about was important for them, was learning all of the services that the Career Center was already providing. So we spend time looking at, we have a strengths program. So our Career Center comes in and presents Focus 2 and what that means for them. They come and present Big Interview, which is an AI interview practice solution that our campus buys into. They come in and present to them Handshake, which is where they post all their internships and jobs. And that continual connection back to our Career Center has been really important. And on that big workshop day, we've always invited Jessie Lombardo to come and help us kick it off, because she does such a great job of giving that pitch for why the NACE competencies are so important, and how you can integrate that into your role as a teacher. So we've really benefited from that SUNY collaboration by inviting our SUNY collaborator in. I'm going back to my question list. And I'm going to go to Jessie on this one next. What's next for experiential learning on your campus? Where's Geneseo going?
So I mentioned at the very beginning, newer to our gen ed requirements is an integrative and applied learning. And again, the terminology was a point of discussion across our campus. And again, like Chilton said, it's a matter of interchangeable and systemness as opposed to like preferences across campus. So I'll I'll leave it at that. Our integrative and applied learning gen ed, where every student has to participate or kind of fulfill that general education requirement is a point of graduation. So a big where we are right now is there's a subcommittee working with faculty all across the institution to approve courses that are tagged for the IAL Gen Ed. So similar to how courses might be tagged for service learning or for, other specific designations across your campuses. Same thing on ours. It's an IAL attribute that exists in Banner. So if a student were to take that course, they achieve that. And so faculty, when they submit their syllabus through Curriculog, there's a committee of us that look for very specific things in the syllabus, including, direct application, reflection, is there integration? So that's been a big piece of that. And also we have a individual student. So if students in their major don't see a course, ideally we'll get to a place where every department has at least a course or two that have that tag. But if they don't, students can actually bring forward their own specific IL experience. And so that could be study abroad, that could be even student employment, it could be a variety of different things. So we have an applied learning coordinator who's approving that. And so we're really looking at those NACE competencies to see growth between like pre and post experiences. So we're trying now, I think we're at the point of really systemizing this and looking at assessment to see how we're doing across campus as far as building in career readiness as a result of those experiential and or career readiness integration throughout a variety of departments and even co-curricular initiatives. So that's a huge undertaking. And we've been working on this for quite a while, but I feel like we're at a place now where we probably have upwards of like maybe 130 courses that have that attribute now. And that was at 0 like a year ago. So I feel like that's been our focus.
Thanks, Jessie. I'm going to take just 1 minute to focus on where we're headed next. This is webinar 3 of 6. So we are going to get back together same time next week, and we have another webinar coming up. Both of our the co-moderators are in the room today. Hope Windle from the SUNY Coyle Center and Mara Huber from SUNY Buffalo will be doing a session on global and connected learning, really focusing on issues of sustainability and how we're pushing those all together as ways that we can do experiential learning, but really focused on a theme. And so I'm really excited for that because I think we're going to get real practical advice from that group. And they've got a great lineup of speakers that I'm just really pumped for. And I always just want to say before we run out of time and the Zoom room gets shut off on us because it is 2:58, we are still accepting submissions into the Experiential Learning Champion Playbook. Some of the first round of submissions are starting to be displayed on the website, and you can see if you visit that website, we're really looking for submissions in 6 major themes: defining experiential learning, what counts, making the case for experiential learning. Jessie owes me that pitch that centers on equity, and that's going to be displayed proudly on the
not
website.
Forgotten, I promise. It's on my.
Oh, I'm just razzing you. Measuring impact with data. We know that it's so important if we're going to get these things written into our strategic plans. We need to be able to show what we're doing with data. If your campuses you think is using data well, send a little micro case study into the experiential learning playbook, because we want to keep sharing and broadcasting these things, supporting faculty through change, integrating experiential learning across the curriculum, and then how do we sustain this change and impact? How do we make sure that we keep making forward progress on this, what we all think is a really important initiative? I want to thank you for taking time out to be with us today. I want to thank our 2 presenters, Chilton and Jessie. This was wonderful. I so enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to everyone. It's good to see you.
Bye, everyone. We're finishing on time.